The prairie stretched quiet and endless, bathed in gold as the sun dipped low behind the ridge line. Jack Mercer rode with his head down, his shoulders curved into the posture of a man who didn't care if he ever sat straight again. The wind tugged gently at the worn brim of his hat. Behind him, the cemetery still held the fresh mound where his only son now lay. A boy too wild for the saddle and too young for the grave. He didn't mean to ride this way. Not exactly. He was just drifting home, half listening to the creak of leather and the slow, steady steps of his old-roan gelding. Then he smelled it. Smoke. Not chimney smoke. Something raw and sharp, like scorched canvas and burning grease. He squinted against the setting sun. On the far slope, dark plumes clawed into the sky. He hesitated, jaw tight. He'd gone his whole life with a simple rule. Other folks' trouble stays other folks' trouble. But his hands pulled the reins anyway. As he approached, the wreck took shape. A wagon lay shattered, wood split and blackened, the canvas already curling in the flames. A body sprawled across the dirt beside it. A woman, face turned skyward, eyes glassy and wide. A man slumped nearby, half covered in a blanket that had once been white. And then, from beneath a charred board near the edge of the wreckage, came the thin, high-pitched sound of a baby crying. Jack stopped in his tracks. The wind tugged at the smoke, revealing a bundle tucked in the shade of the overturned seat cloth, scorched on one side, cheeks pink on the other. The child couldn't have been more than a few months old, alive, somehow, in the middle of hell. Jack didn't move for a long time. He stared at the baby like it was a snake ready to strike. A part of him whispered, "Leave it. Go home. Let nature take what it wants." He stepped back toward his horse, one foot in the stirrup, but the crying continued, raw, relentless. He looked again. The baby had turned its face toward him, wet eyes locking onto his through soot and firelight. There was no logic in what he did next. No plan, he just moved. He walked to the baby, wrapped it tighter in the burned cloth and lifted it awkwardly. The baby kicked against his chest and let out another wail. Jack cursed under his breath. "You're not supposed to be here," he muttered, rocking slightly. "None of us are." He scanned the remains one last time. No movement, no mercy. Whatever storm had hit this family, it was done now. All that was left was ash. He climbed back onto his horse, the baby against his chest, and turned toward the horizon. The prairie wind blew behind him, sweeping through the burning wreckage and carrying its ashes to the sky. He didn't know where he was riding. Not really. All he knew was, somehow, he wasn't alone anymore. The ranch looked worse than he remembered. The grass had grown tall around the front gate, and one of the fence posts had rotted clean through. The barn roof sagged on the north end, and the porch creaked with a sadness that matched the man stepping onto it. Jack shifted the baby in his arms, grumbling low as he unlocked the door. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the sour smell of old wood. He didn't bring the child into the house, not yet. He laid him in a feed bin in the barn, padding it with an old saddle blanket. The baby whimpered, then screamed. Jack filled a tin bottle with warm goat's milk and fed him by trial and error, unsure of the right angle, the right pace, or whether the damn thing would choke. It didn't. It drank like it hadn't eaten in days. "You're gonna die out here, Jack," muttered, wiping dribble from the baby's chin. "So am I, just a matter of when." He left the child in the barn that night, locked the door, went inside, poured a drink, and sat at the table he hadn't used since his boy's funeral. His hand shook a little as he reached for the bottle. He thought he might cry. He didn't. Sleep came hard. Just before dawn, the baby wailed loud enough to pierce timber. Jack sat up in the dark, cursed, pulled on his boots, and marched out to the barn. "I should have left you there," he hissed. The baby only cried louder. He fed it again, held it until the cries turned to hiccups. Something inside him shifted, not softened, exactly, but turned sideways. He caught himself staring at the child's hands, tiny and curled. One of them gripped his finger with surprising force. That grip stirred something old and painful. He hadn't held a baby since his own was born, the day his wife bled out in the bed they built together. He could still hear her, even now, calling his name between ragged breaths. His son had grown up haunted by it. Never said the words, but Jack could see it in his eyes. "You killed her." Maybe he had. By the time the boy was 16, he was wild as a broken colt. Wouldn't stay in school, wouldn't stay on the ranch. He took to riding fast and drinking faster, and then one day, the horse threw him, broke his neck. Jack buried him under the cottonwood tree and hadn't spoken to another soul since. Until now. He found the name by accident carved into a wagon spoke he salvaged for kindling. Just 5 letters. Milo. Maybe it was the baby's, maybe not. It stuck. "All right, Milo," he muttered as he changed a filthy cloth and cursed the mess. "You win." Days passed. He meant to ride into town and give the baby away. He even packed a sack once. Saddled the horse. But at the edge of the trail, he just sat there. Something in his chest tightened, refused to let go. He turned around and went home. A rhythm began to form. He fixed a bottle first thing in the morning, cleared out the weeds near the fence line, patched the barn roof. He set traps for coyotes and chased a rattler out from under the back step. Every few hours, Milo screamed. Jack responded, complained, the whole time. but he responded. The house changed too. The porch got swept. The table saw a clean cloth. Jack scrubbed the floors for the first time in years, not because he wanted to, but because Milo kept putting things in his mouth. One night, long after the lamps were out and the wind was up, Jack sat in the rocking chair by the stove with the baby in his arms. The boy's eyes blinked slowly, almost asleep. Jack held a bottle in one hand, cradled the child against his chest with the other. He looked down at the baby and whispered, "I'm not the one you were supposed to get." Milo stirred, tiny fingers reaching up, latching onto Jack's shirt, his hand, whatever he could hold, and he held tight. Jack didn't move, didn't say another word. He just sat there, rocking slowly in the dark, feeling a silence he hadn't known in years, not the silence of grief, but something else, something almost like peace. The road into town hadn't changed, but the man riding it had. Dust kicked up around Jack's boots as he guided the horse down Main Street, the baby strapped against his chest in a sling stitched from burlap and saddle leather. Milo blinked, up at the sky.com for once, wrapped tight against the cold morning air. The town, on the other hand, wasn't calm. People stopped and stared. It wasn't just the sight of Jack, it was that he'd shown up at all. He'd been gone from their world for months, maybe longer. The last they'd seen of him was at his son's funeral, shoulders hunched like a beaten dog, face carved from stone. Rumors had floated since then. He drank himself half blind, he talked to ghosts, he shot at shadows. Now here he was, with the baby in his arms. Jack didn't look at anyone. He tied his horse outside the general store and walked in like the air, when it didn't crackle with judgment. Inside, the store smelled of beans and tobacco. He made a slow pass down the aisles, grabbing oats, flour, baby soap. He stared at the rack of tiny clothes like it might bite him. A soft voice broke the tension. "They outgrow him quick. Get one size up or you'll be back in a week." He turned. The woman who spoke was maybe in her mid-30s. Her eyes were tired but kind. A gold wedding ring hung from a chain around her neck. Jack grunted. "He ain't mine." She nodded like she'd heard that kind of lie before. "Still needs clothes." He reached for a wool blanket and a few soft cotton shirts. She stepped closer. "I'm Mara. I used to be a teacher here." Before she glanced at the baby, then away. "I lost mine too." Jack said nothing, just handed her the basket. They moved together through the store in silence. At the counter, Mara added a small wooden rattle and a jar of salve for diaper rash. She paid before Jack could stop her. "You'll need it," she said. Outside, the sheriff leaned against a post, arms crossed, badge glinting. "Jack Mercer," he said, voice low. "You always ride into town carrying strays." Jack adjusted the baby. "Found him near Ridge Pass, wagon burned, whole family dead. You see who did it?" "Nope, don't lie, Jack. We've had 3 raids in 2 weeks. Settlers gone missing. You didn't ride into fire without seeing something." Jack stared at him for a long time, then shook his head. "Just smoke and bones." The sheriff didn't push. Just watched him ride off. "Keep your doors bolted." By nightfall, the prairie felt too quiet. Jack's gut twisted in a way he hadn't felt since the war, a buzz under the skin. A warning. The first man came on foot, a shadow slinking through the pasture. Jack spotted him from the barn. He blew out the lamp and grabbed the shotgun. The second man circled to the chicken coop. The third rode in fast, kicking dust, a torch in his hand. "Hey there, old man," one called out. "We think you've got something belongs to us." Jack stepped onto the porch, baby crying inside. "Only thing I got here is a grave with your name on it." Laughter, then gunfire. The world shattered into flashes, muzzled bursts breaking glass, a scream from inside the house. Jack fired twice, dropped one of them. Another charged through the back window. Jack caught him with the butt of the gun. He didn't feel the graze until after his arm burned, shirt soaked. He dragged the last bandit out by the collar, made him dig the graves with shaking hands before Jack put a bullet between his eyes. By the time the smoke cleared, dawn had begun to bloom. The sky was pale. Milo lay curled on a blanket in the corner, face slick with tears but breathing. Jack slumped to the floor, bloodied, holding the boy in his lap. "You almost didn't make it," he whispered, voice rough. "I should have sent you away." The baby whimpered and shifted closer. Jack held him tighter. "You're not just a chore anymore," he said, staring at the wall. "You're all that's left." Jack rode into town at a slow pace, one arm in a sling, his shirt torn and stained dark where blood had dried. Milo slept against his chest, strapped tight in the sling, his breath warm and even. The townsfolk stopped what they were doing. Hammers paused mid-air. Shopkeepers leaned out of doorways. Whispers followed him like shadows. He didn't stop until he reached the sheriff's office. The lawman stepped onto the porch, his hat in hand. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Jack said, "There were 3 of them, raiders. Same ones that hit that wagon. They came for the boy." The sheriff scanned him from head to toe. "You all right?" Jack didn't answer. He just looked down at the baby and then back up. "I buried him," he added. The sheriff gave a slow nod. "Ain't no law here for justice that it comes too late. There was no paperwork, no questions, just quiet respect and a slow handshake between 2 men who understood grief too well to put it into words." 3 days passed. The air smelled like spring for the first time in a long while. Jack was out near the pasture, shirt rolled to his elbows, sweat on his brow, hammering new rails into a fence that hadn't stood proper in years. Milo was tucked against his chest again, head bobbing gently with each movement. He'd taken to the rhythm of work like it soothed him. A horse approached from the trail. Jack turned to see Mara riding slow, holding a basket. She dismounted and walked over with her usual quiet strength. "You've been busy," she said, eyeing the fence, the tilled patch of soil near the house. Jack grunted. "Somebody's got to do it." She glanced at Milo, his tiny face turned toward the wind. "You know, you didn't rescue him." Jack squinted. "No." She stepped closer. "He rescued you." They stood in silence for a moment, both looking out across the open land, still bruised, still beautiful. Jack cleared his throat. "There's food, if you want to stay for dinner." It wasn't an invitation, not exactly. But it was more than he'd said to anyone in a long time. She smiled softly. "I'd like that." As the sun began to set behind the ridge, Jack watched Milo crawl through the garden dirt, chasing a butterfly with unsteady hands. He reached down, lifted the boy gently, and stood him upright. Milo wobbled, grinned, took one step, then another, before falling with a soft thump. Jack laughed. Not a big laugh, just enough. He helped the boy back up and tried again. Later they sat on the porch, Jack, Mara, and the baby between them. No words, just the quiet hum of wind and insects, and the creak of wood under tired bones. The man who once buried his past had planted a seed. He didn't need to ride anymore. He'd finally found a reason to stay. I rode into smoke thinking I had nothing left, but what I found in the ashes wasn't just a child, it was a reason to live again.